My twin brother and I have always been inseparable, but fate had a strange way of testing our bond. When he injured his leg, I took it upon myself to assume his identity and go to work in his place. It was a seamless switch, at least until his leg healed and he returned to the office. Barely an hour had passed before my phone began vibrating furiously with his frantic messages on WeChat. "Bro, what did you do to our cold and heartless?" The moment I arrived, he smiled at me. Smiled. And it gets worse. He tried to kiss me in the elevator. "Bro, reply to me." He just summoned me to his office. I'm scared. Do you think he's going to eat me alive? Welcome to He History channel. Subscribe to follow all our latest adventures. Story begins. My brother called me late one evening, his voice dripping with desperation. "Bro, I hurt my leg playing basketball. I can't go to work, but the company's planning layoffs. I can't risk taking time off. Please, can you go in my place for a few days?" I refused outright. "No way. What if someone realizes I'm not you?" He dismissed my concern with a casual wave of words. "Relax. We're identical twins. Just show up, act like me, and do the bare minimum. I'll prep the work at home, and you can hand it in. Easy." His wide, pleading eyes were impossible to resist. Against my better judgment, I caved. The next morning, I arrived at his company. Before I even made it through the lobby, 2 women from his department spotted me and shrieked, "Benjamin, when did you hit it big? A Range Rover? Seriously? And look at you today, new clothes, new hairstyle. So much better than those boring black glasses you always wear. Honestly, you've been hiding your good looks under a rock. You could totally be a celebrity." Benjamin Tomlinson was my brother. I, on the other hand, used to be Edison Tomlinson, until I changed my name to Edmund Richardson. I recognized these women from the photos my brother had shown me last night. Flashing a polite smile, I played along, walking with them toward the elevators. As we waited, I heard sharp footsteps behind me. Turning, I saw him. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his tie perfectly knotted, his entire demeanor exuding authority. His cold, sharp features and faintly upturned almond-shaped eyes gave him an air of aloof elegance. Surrounded by a small entourage, he glanced at me, just a fleeting look, but the corners of his lips twitched in a subtle smile. That was Alexander Daneman, CEO of Elite Group. And damn it, we were wearing the same suit. As the elevator doors closed on him and his exclusive team, I couldn't shake the feeling that his gaze lingered on me for a second longer than necessary. There was something about that faint smirk of his that made my heart skip a beat. I followed my brother's colleagues to his office and settled into his desk. Barely a moment later, a middle-aged man stormed over and slapped a stack of papers onto the table. "You're presenting this at the afternoon product seminar," he barked. "Here's the information." My brother hadn't mentioned anything about this. Stunned, I asked, "Why me?" The man grunted. "Richard was supposed to do it, but his wife just had a baby. You worked on this product design before, didn't you? Handle it." Another colleague piped up in protest. "But Benjamin hasn't been involved with this project in ages. He doesn't know the details. Maybe Thomas's assistant could step in instead?" The manager exploded. "I already gave him the materials. If you're so good at delegating, why don't you do it yourself?" I skimmed the documents. The design looked familiar, eerily similar to a proposal I'd seen before in my own work. I smirked. This was nothing I couldn't handle. "It's fine," I said, cutting off further objections. "I'll take care of it." After the manager left, my colleague leaned closer and whispered, "He's setting you up. If you mess up in front of the executives, he'll have grounds to recommend you for layoffs." "Why is he targeting me?" "He's got a quota to meet. His cousin just joined the team and isn't pulling his weight. If you're out, his cousin stays." Office politics. I spent the rest of the morning studying the incomplete materials, only to realize the gaps were deliberate. When I confronted the manager, he waved me off with a sneer. "That's all you're getting. Figure it out." Annoyed but undeterred, I called my brother. "Why am I suddenly in charge of this seminar? Can't I just come clean? You're insane if you think you can waltz in here with me still in a wheelchair. Besides, if you show up, our swap gets exposed. So what's the plan?" Give me a sec, he groaned. I'll ask Richard to send over the full materials. 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed with the missing documents. Skipping lunch, I threw myself into preparation. Engrossed in work, I almost jumped out of my chair when a deep voice broke my concentration. That suit looks good on you. I turned to find Alexander Daneman standing by my desk. Calmly, I swiveled my chair to face him. Leaning back, I crossed my arms and studied him with a smirk. It'd look great on you too, I said, my tone light and teasing. But your tie's too stiff, and you've buttoned up too tightly. Though I suppose that fits your style, cold and professional. His lips curved into an amused smile. Are you new? I don't recall seeing you before. Not new. With a company this big, it's no wonder you've missed me. What's your name? Benjamin Tomlinson. He nodded, his eyes lingering for a beat. Not heading to lunch? I've got the afternoon seminar to prep for, I replied. No time. He glanced at the documents on my desk before turning to leave. Prepare well. I won't disturb you. Half an hour later, a man appeared with a high-end lunchbox. Got the wrong person, I said. The man checked my name tag. No mistake. The CEO personally bought this for you. He also pushed the meeting to 4. He said you should eat before getting back to work. Was this normal elite group hospitality or something else entirely? Either way, this CEO was fascinating. By 4, the conference room was packed. To my surprise, Alexander was among the attendees. Before I could sit, he beckoned me over and leaned in, his voice low and intimate. Did the lunch suit your taste? I straightened my back, his proximity unsettling me. It was great, thank you. But I'm not one to owe favors. How much do I owe you? Talking about money is so mundane. Why not treat me to a meal instead? Then we'll call it even. Was it my imagination, or did his breath intentionally brush against my neck as he spoke? A faint heat crept up my spine, leaving me flustered. The conference room was packed as I began presenting the product's design, functionality, market research, and user feedback. My voice was steady, my points well organized, and by the end, I had the entire room's attention. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my manager's face darken. He had been waiting for me to fail. Alexander Daneman, however, leaned back in his chair, an amused glint in his eyes. Not bad, he said with a faint smile. Prepare a complete report and send it directly to the production department for testing. With that, the manager swallowed whatever scathing remarks he'd been preparing. His chance to undermine me had vanished, at least for now. After work, I went home, changed into something casual, and headed out to meet some old friends for dinner. It had been years since we'd seen each other, and the reunion was lively. Too lively, I ended up drinking far more than I should have. By the time they suggested a midnight round at the karaoke bar, I was done for the night. Excusing myself, I stumbled out of the private room, intending to call it a day. Just as I stepped into the hallway, someone bumped right into me. Instinctively, I caught the person by the waist to keep them from falling. The man looked up, his glassy eyes shimmering as if with unshed tears. His face, usually pale and composed, was flushed from alcohol. You? He slurred, blinking up at me. What are you doing here? I was out with friends, I explained, still holding on to him. He tilted his head, his voice confused but oddly plaintive. Dinner? Huh? Didn't you say you owed me a meal? Why haven't you invited me yet? He swayed unsteadily, and before I could reply, he collapsed further into my arms. You're drunk out of your mind, I muttered. How about I treat you another day? No, he snapped, his tone childishly stubborn. You promised. You're not backing out. Before I could argue, he flagged down a passing waiter. Bring me food, he demanded. I'm eating now. 20 minutes later, the table was filled with dishes, but the man in question had passed out cold, slumped against the chair. I shook his shoulder. Hey, Mr. Daneman, your food's here. Don't bother me, he mumbled, batting my hand away before slumping forward, right onto my lap. Seriously? I groaned, trying to shift him. There's an entire table. Why do you have to end up here? I'm dizzy, he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. Let me sleep. I froze, feeling my body tense. Men shouldn't just throw themselves into other men's laps. What if something happened? When he went completely limp, I sighed. Leaving him here wasn't an option. Someone might recognize him, or worse, take advantage of him. Taking him home was out of the question. He'd see my brother, and our little twin switch scheme would be exposed. That left only one choice, the hotel. On the way, he proved to be the most infuriating drunk I'd ever met. He pulled my hair, reached into my shirt, and even pinched me hard enough to leave marks. "Oomph," he muttered disdainfully, his fingers brushing over my chest. Too hard. Not fun to touch. Annoyed, I slapped his backside. "Keep your hands to yourself, or I'm dropping you right here." "No," he yelped, clutching onto me like a lifeline. "Don't leave me. I'm scared to be alone." By the time we got to the room, I was questioning every decision I'd ever made. After tucking him into bed, I turned to leave. But just as my hand reached the door, a flash of lightning illuminated the room. He bolted upright, his wide eyes brimming with tears. The next clap of thunder had him breaking into a cold sweat, his trembling hand clutching at my sleeve like a lifeline. "Mr. Daneman?" I crouched beside him, concern replacing my earlier irritation. "Are you okay?" But before I could get up to fetch him some water, he lunged forward, wrapping his arms around me. His body was warm, his breath shaky against my neck, and I froze once again. "Don't go," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm scared of thunder." That night my foster father beat my foster mother to death. It was raining and there was so much thunder. So much blood. His words cut through me. Whatever irritation I'd felt dissolved in the face of his vulnerability. I tried to guide him back onto the bed, but another boom of thunder sent him burying his face against my chest, trembling like a frightened child. "Don't leave," he pleaded softly. "Please stay." Something inside me gave way. Against my better judgment, I relented. "Fine. I'll stay." I lay down beside him, my heart pounding far too loudly in my chest. The alcohol in my system and his warmth against me made it impossible to think straight. Before I knew it, I drifted off. Morning came with a stiff neck and an unsettling realization. Something felt off. When I groggily stumbled into the bathroom to check my reflection, my heart nearly stopped. A hickey? No, several. One on my neck, another on my chest. I yanked my shirt aside to confirm. Definitely not a dream. Storming into the CEO's office, I didn't bother with formalities. I slammed the door shut and threw my jacket onto the couch before marching up to his desk. Alexander glanced up from his papers, startled by my entrance. His eyes widened further as I started undoing my shirt buttons. "What are you?" he began, his voice faltering as his face turned bright red. I stopped in front of him, pulling the collar of my shirt down to reveal the marks. "Care to explain these?" I demanded, my tone icy. He hesitated, then his lips curved into a devilish smirk. Leaning back in his chair, he tilted his head provocatively. "I gave them to you. What are you going to do about it? You're just admitting it like that?" I shot back, incredulous. "Why not?" He shrugged. "It wasn't on purpose. I was drunk. And it's not like I did anything else. We're both men. What's the big deal?" I stared at him, stunned. "That's your excuse? Seriously? That's the best you've got?" With a maddening calmness, he raised an eyebrow. "If it bothers you so much, why not kiss me back and call it even? What kind of nonsense is this?" I snapped, leaning forward and trapping him between my arms, my hands gripping the arms of his chair. "So, do you often get drunk and kiss people randomly? You think that's no big deal?" He opened his mouth to argue, but the door suddenly swung open. It was the assistant who had introduced himself as the CEO's aide before. His eyes widened as he took in the scene, me, disheveled, effectively cabinet, whose face was flushed a deep red. The assistant promptly closed the door, disappearing as though he had never been there. Realizing how inappropriate my actions were, I awkwardly straightened and began fixing my shirt. "Look, just don't let it happen again, all right? I'll let it slide this time." I thought that would be the end of it, but Alexander didn't seem satisfied. "I don't want you thinking I took advantage of you," he said, his voice steady but serious. I can compensate you. Compensate me? How? He seemed to ponder this for a moment before looking up with a bizarrely resolute expression. Fine. You can kiss me back. Then we're even. I froze. What? Did he even realize what he was saying? My heart started pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. How could he throw out something like that so casually? The thought of him possibly kissing other people, and then offering them the same deal, made my stomach churn. You've done this to others before, haven't you? He frowned. What kind of nonsense are you imagining? I've never kissed anyone before. Last night was a one-off. I was drunk and there was thunder. That's all. For some reason, relief washed over me. But since he had offered, why not take the opportunity? Smirking, I tugged on his tie and leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to his neck. I let my lips linger for just a moment, the warmth of his skin sending a strange thrill through me. When I pulled back, I adjusted his tie and straightened his shirt, speaking with mock seriousness. We're even now. His face turned a deeper shade of red, and whether it was from anger or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. Feeling rather pleased with myself, I left his office and returned to work, ready to finish optimizing the proposal. By the end of the day, I was looking forward to a quiet weekend. But just as I was packing up, the assistant showed up again. The CO wants you to accompany him to tonight's gala. I frowned. What for? Shouldn't he be bringing a date to something like that? The collaboration partner for your optimized proposal will be there. The CEO wants you present in case they have any questions about the project. Great. Just great. Outside the office, I waited for Alexander by the company car. When he finally arrived, he looked me over from head to toe, frowning. You're wearing that to the gala? I did a slow turn. What's wrong with it? Since the wardrobe incident, I had been wearing my brother's clothes to work. It was fine for the office, but for a high-profile event, it was admittedly less than ideal. Still, I pretended not to understand. Get in the car, he ordered. We'll stop somewhere to get you something more appropriate. I laughed. This isn't coming out of my paycheck, is it? Because if it is, I'm not interested. He gave me a pointed look. Are you really that hard up? You're the boss. Don't you know how much your employees make? Alexander rolled his eyes and drove us to an upscale boutique. After being fitted into a tailored suit, I emerged to find him looking me over with approval. Elegant and striking, he said. I can't believe I didn't notice you before. Grinning, I undid the top 2 buttons of my shirt, revealing just a hint of my chest. What about now? Do I look more alluring? His smile turned into a tight smirk as he stepped closer and yanked my tie back into place. Behave. Stop trying to attract trouble. Real men should have self-respect, or they'll draw wolves. What a killjoy. The gala was a whirlwind of glittering lights and flowing champagne. The city's elite mingled, and I was thankful that no one here recognized me. With Alexander by my side, our conversations with the collaboration partners went smoothly. After an hour of negotiations, we sealed the deal with handshakes and a toast. Once they left, Alexander studied me curiously. You're unusually comfortable in this kind of setting. More so than I am. I laughed. That's because you're here, Theo. With you around, how could I not feel confident? Before he could respond, a man approached with a champagne flute in hand. The moment I saw him, my smile froze. David Miller. Mr. Daneman, I presume? David greeted warmly, extending a hand to Alexander. I'm David Miller, Vice President of Richardson Southtown Group. It's a pleasure to meet you. Before I could slip away, Alexander grabbed my arm. Mr. Miller, allow me to introduce our lead designer, Benjamin Tomlinson. If you have any questions about our products, feel free to reach out to him. David's polite smile faltered as he turned to me. Of course. Feigning obliviousness, I offered a bright smile and shook his hand. Looking forward to working with you, Mr. Miller. As soon as I could, I excused myself and made a beeline for the restroom. David followed shortly after, slipping in like a secret agent. What the hell are you doing here? And why are you pretending to work for Elite? My brother's injured, I said simply. I'm just covering for him. David's eyes narrowed. Aren't you worried about someone recognizing you? Especially since you're back in this city? Relax. No one's noticed so far. David groaned. You're playing with fire. Alexander Daneman isn't just any CO, he's Charles Clark's cousin. You can't keep this up forever. I know, I said with a sigh. I'll tell him the truth eventually. Just, not yet? David shook his head. You'd better. Because when this all blows up, I won't be able to cover for you. Back in the ballroom, I spotted Alexander locked in a heated argument with a middle-aged man. Who's that? I asked David. Ziv Daneman. Alexander's cousin and the former CEO of Elite. The name sent a chill down my spine. I'd heard plenty about Ziv, none of it good. His scandals had nearly destroyed Elite's reputation 4 years ago, and now he was back, glaring at Alexander with thinly veiled malice. This position belongs to me, Ziv sneered. You're just a backwater brat who got lucky. Don't think you'll keep it for long. Alexander's response was calm, almost cold. You couldn't handle this role then, and you certainly can't now. If you miss prison that much, I can arrange for you to go back. Ziv's face twisted with rage, and his hand shot up, aiming for Alexander's face. I caught Ziv Daneman's hand mid-swing, stepping between him and Alexander. My voice was steady, but my words carried an edge. Mr. Daneman, this is a brand-hosted gala. Your behavior will bring unnecessary trouble to the group. His eyes narrowed, his tone dripping with contempt. And who do you think you are, interfering with me? I'm an Elite employee. Protecting the company's reputation is my duty. A lowly employee lecturing me? You're fired. He pointed at me, clearly expecting his words to carry weight. I smirked and gestured toward Alexander. The company's CEO is standing right here. You're the deputy. What authority do you think you have to throw your weight around? He stammered, face flushed with rage. Before he could erupt further, the event organizers appeared, forcing him to swallow his fury. The onlookers dispersed, and Alexander exchanged pleasantries with the hosts before pulling me away. As we left, I noticed a fleeting cold smirk on Ziv's face. A knot of unease tightened in my chest. It didn't take long for my suspicions to come true. On the drive back, Alexander's body began to heat up unnaturally. I'd seen this before, someone had drugged him. Hold on, I said, trying to keep calm. I'll get you to a hospital. No, he murmured, his voice shaky. It's too late. Take me home. A cold bath will help. When we reached his villa, I found his keys in his pocket and unlocked the door. But as I pushed it open, I froze. There, just inside the entrance, was a pair of women's high heels. Something was wrong. I gently closed the door and hurried back to the car, shoving Alexander into the passenger seat. His half-lidded eyes turned to me, desperation and discomfort clear on his face. I need to go home, he pleaded. Please. You can't. Your house isn't safe right now. I'm taking you to the hospital. I called David Miller on the way, instructing him to check the villa with a team. Whatever trap Ziv had set, I wasn't letting Alexander walk into it. As I focused on driving, a scorching hand suddenly landed on my thigh. Startled, I nearly swerved off the road. Alexander, pull yourself together. I barked, slamming the brakes and pulling over. But he didn't listen. His hand wandered further, and before he could reach anywhere unacceptable, I slapped it away. His lips trembled as he looked at me with wide, pitiful eyes. I feel terrible. Help me. Before I could respond, he leaned in, his lips brushing against the corner of mine. My breath hitched as he wrapped his arms around my neck, pulling me closer with surprising strength. I tried to push him off, but he clung like a vine, his lips trailing heat wherever they touched. Unable to escape, I tangled my fingers in his hair and tugged, forcing him to pull back. Look at me, I said firmly, gripping his jaw. Alexander, I'm a man. His teary eyes blinked at me, uncomprehending. He pouted and muttered, so what? You're not even reacting. What kind of man are you? I was so stunned I laughed. Are you trying to pick a fight? He glared, defiant. Fine. Kill me if you want. But if you're going to kill me, at least let me die in your arms. My patience snapped. You're going to regret this, I growled before closing the distance between us. The kiss ignited something between us, an electric charge neither of us could resist. His shirt tore under my hands, and his nails raked across my back, leaving burning trails. As our breaths mingled, I cupped his flushed face in my hands. He blinked up at me, confused. "Why'd you stop? Keep going?" I hesitated, suddenly unsure. "Do you know who I am?" His brow furrowed. "What kind of question is that? You're you?" "No," I pulled out my phone, hit record, and asked again. "What's my name?" "Benjamin," he answered impatiently. I bit his lip lightly, shaking my head. "Wrong. I'm not Benjamin. My name is Edmund. Remember that Edmund is the one who's here with you tonight?" "Fine, Edmund," he murmured, his voice low and sultry. "Now hold me." 2 hours later, David called to confirm my suspicions. "You were right. His villa was a trap. We found a woman inside, completely out of it and half naked. Looks like she'd taken quite a few pills. There were also reporters staked out nearby with cameras." "Ziv's work?" "Yes." "Most likely," David replied grimly. "If you'd taken Alexander home, those reporters would have had enough evidence to ruin him." My jaw tightened. Ziv's willingness to sabotage his own family was beyond despicable. Back at the villa, I carried Alexander inside and cleaned up before crashing on the couch with him. By morning, he was still out cold, so I left for the Richardson office to meet David. "What else did you find?" I asked. David's face was grim. "Ziv's fingerprints are all over this. He planned to frame Alexander the same way he was exposed years ago. If you hadn't acted, Alexander would be in the same position Ziv was, drugged, compromised, and humiliated." I nodded, already expecting this. "We need to be more cautious. Ziv won't stop here." When I returned to the office, Alexander was back to his usual composed self, as if the previous night had never happened. I waited, expecting him to bring it up. He didn't. By lunchtime, my patience ran out. I marched to his office and crossed my arms. "You really don't have anything to say to me?" He glanced up, clearly uncomfortable. "What do you want me to say?" "Try acknowledging what happened last night," I pressed. "Anything at all?" He coughed awkwardly, looking everywhere but at me. "About that? I may not have been fully aware, but I'm not the kind of person to shirk responsibility. Whatever you want, just name it." I blinked. "That's what you have to say? Seriously?" His expression turned defensive. "What? Are you going to act like you're the victim here? This isn't about who's the victim." I snapped. Then it hit me. He didn't remember anything I'd told him about my true identity. Now I had a choice. Remind him, or let him keep thinking I was Benjamin. As I struggled to find the right words to explain, Alexander's tone turned impatient. "What do you want me to do?" "I already told you, I'll take responsibility." I nearly choked. Responsibility? I wasn't a woman, and besides, I was the one who, well, took the initiative. What exactly was he planning to take responsibility for? Clearing my throat, I tried to clarify. "Look, you weren't in your right mind last night, but I was. If anyone needs to take responsibility, it's me." Alexander's eyes lit up. "Oh, and how exactly do you plan to take responsibility?" Leaning down, I kissed the corner of his lips, a gentle brush of reassurance. "Last night might have been an accident, but I do like you. Alexander Daneman, I'm formally asking, will you be my boyfriend?" He huffed, pretending to be dissatisfied. "What kind of confession is that? You're coming to me empty-handed?" I laughed awkwardly. "I've been too worried about you being angry to prepare anything. Let me make it up to you later." That seemed to appease him. But then his expression turned serious. "By the way, the police called me earlier. The woman who broke into my house last night woke up. They asked if I wanted to come in and talk about what happened. What exactly went down?" I explained everything about the trap set at his villa and how I had intervened. His brows furrowed in confusion. The drink came from a server. Ziv bribing them makes sense. But how did David know to go to my house? And why would he bring the police and a doctor? I asked him to. His eyes narrowed. "And he just did as you asked? You barely know each other." I hesitated. "Well, we know each other better than you think. But I wasn't sure how to explain it to you." "Wait." Alexander's voice dropped. "Don't tell me you weren't serious about wanting to be with me?" "No. I'm completely serious." I hurriedly reassured him. But there's something else. Before I could finish, my phone buzzed. It was my brother. Bro. The doctor says my leg's fine. I'm getting my cast off next week and should be able to go back to work soon. I ended the call, my mind racing to figure out how to continue the conversation. Alexander, however, surprised me. If you're not ready to tell me, don't force yourself. Just promise me one thing. Don't lie about your feelings. Anything else, I can wait for. Relief washed over me. All right, I agreed. Once my brother's back at work, I'll explain everything. Elite's restructuring went smoothly, cutting a significant number of employees. Once the layoff list was finalized, I took the opportunity to request a week off on my brother's behalf. It gave me the chance to return to Richardson Group and handle my own work during the day. Alexander, meanwhile, was buried in negotiations for a new energy vehicle project. Between his busy schedule and mine, we hadn't seen each other in days, relying solely on late-night calls to stay connected. One evening, after finishing my tasks, I drove to his villa to surprise him. It wasn't until 2 a.m. that he finally came home, looking utterly exhausted. "Why so late?" I asked, helping him out of his jacket. He sighed heavily. "Ziv's been making moves behind my back. I need to finalize the funding for the new energy project before he does. If he signs the deal first, I'll lose my leverage." I frowned. Why is he so fixated on this one project? Elite's a massive company. Couldn't he just secure another deal to establish himself? "You don't understand," Alexander said bitterly. "My grandfather never wanted me to lead Elite. 4 years ago, when Ziv was disgraced, my grandfather had no choice but to put me in charge. Now that Ziv's out, he wants me to step aside. But he's trying to save face, so he set this condition. Whoever secures funding for the energy project first gets his shares." Alexander's voice turned cold as he continued. "I own 30% of Elite's shares, inherited from my parents. Ziv also owns 30%. My grandfather's 10% is the deciding factor. If he gives it to Ziv, Ziv becomes the largest shareholder. Even the board wouldn't be able to protect me then." I reached out, gently cupping his face. "Your grandfather's blind if he thinks Ziv is better than you. Ziv couldn't even match your pinky toe." Alexander gave a bitter laugh, leaning into my touch. "I was kidnapped when I was 3. My parents spent years searching for me, abandoning their careers to follow every lead. They finally found me when I was 15, but they died in a car accident on the way to get me. My grandfather always blamed me for their deaths. He thinks I'm cursed." My chest tightened. I had heard bits and pieces about Alexander's childhood from Charles Clark, but I had no idea it had been this cruel. As we sat together on the couch, I traced his jawline with my fingers, noticing how much weight he'd lost. My heart ached for him. "Would Richardson Group's investment secure the project for you?" I asked softly. He nodded. "Of course. Richardson Group has the capital, and Elite has the talent and technology. It would be a win-win. I've reached out to them, but after submitting my proposal 2 months ago, I've heard nothing." I smiled faintly. "Don't worry. Tomorrow, Richardson Group will give you their answer." He looked at me, confused. "How can you be so sure? Just trust me. Go meet David Miller tomorrow. He won't turn you away this time." The next day, as Alexander headed to work, I stayed behind in his bed, catching up on some much-needed sleep. I was jolted awake by a string of frantic messages from my brother. "Bro, what did you do to our cold and heartless?" He smiled at me today. And even scarier, he tried to kiss me in the elevator. "Bro, please reply. He just called me to his office. I'm terrified. What if he eats me alive?" I bolted upright, panic surging through me. "Damn it. We've been found out." I replied to my brother's frantic messages. "Stay where you are. I'm coming over. And remember, he's your sister-in-law now, so stay away from him." "My brother? What do you mean? Whose sister-in-law?" I didn't bother explaining further. By the time I arrived, my brother was sitting stiffly on the couch in Alexander Daneman's office, nervously picking at his nails. Alexander's cold gaze shifted from him to me. "Care to explain? Which one of you is the imposter?" I gave my brother a swift kick. "Weren't you supposed to start next week? Why are you here early? He looked at me aggrieved. I didn't want to lose too much pay, so I figured I might as well come back since my leg's fine. But the moment I got in the elevator, the CEO started saying weird things, asking why I didn't sleep in, why I didn't come to work with him, and then, he tried to kiss me. I was terrified. Alexander's voice was glacial. Well, who's going to explain this? Taking a deep breath, I confessed, he's Benjamin. I'm his twin brother. My name used to be Edison Tomlinson, but now it's Edmund Richardson. After our parents divorced, Benjamin stayed with our dad, and I went with our mom. She took me back to her family and changed my surname. Alexander pointed an accusing finger at me, his voice rising. You liar! I didn't mean to deceive you. Benjamin hurt his leg and couldn't come to work, and he was scared of being laid off if he took time off. That's why I filled in for a few days. And after we got together? You still lied to me? I didn't lie. I shot back. I told you in the car that night. I even told you my real name. Alexander's eyes reddened, filled with disbelief. He looked so betrayed that I immediately pulled out my phone, ignoring my brother's wide-eyed look of fascination. Get out, I snapped at him. Go. Now, once the door was shut, I hit play on the recording from that night. What's my name? Benjamin. Oh, I'm not Benjamin. My name is Edmund. Remember that? It's Edmund. Tonight, the one with you is me, Edmund. Fine. Edmund. You're Edmund. Edmund, hold me. The recording ended. Alexander's expression twisted with a mix of fury and shock, his voice trembling. You recorded it? What kind of maniac are you? If I hadn't recorded it, how would I prove I wasn't lying? You forgot everything the next morning. I tried to explain, but you kept cutting me off. That's why it dragged on until now. I met his gaze, my tone softening. I really like you. I've wanted to come clean since we started, but I couldn't find the right moment. I'm sorry. I never wanted to deceive you. If you're angry, you can hit me, yell at me, I'll take it. Alexander's expression shifted, and he asked, So, you're a Richardson? And you're close with David Miller. Does that mean you're the new CEO of Richardson Group? Yes. That's me. Alexander didn't hold back. His eyes reddened further, and he kicked me multiple times, bit down hard on my shoulder, and even sank his teeth into my lip. Stop pretending you're some tragic victim, he snarled. I wrapped my arms around him, letting him vent his frustration. Somewhere along the way, his biting turned into kissing, and before I knew it, his hands were on my belt. Not here, I managed to gasp, grabbing his wrist. This is your office. Someone could walk in any second. Alexander sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. Let them. I'm sleeping with my boyfriend, not committing a crime. Who cares? 2 weeks later, Richardson Group and Elite officially finalized their partnership. True to his word, Daneman Sr. transferred his shares to Alexander, despite his dislike for him. Ziv, however, didn't take the loss well. After a heated argument with the old man, he stormed out in a rage, only to get into a car accident that left him in a coma. With the project moving smoothly, Alexander and I finally had some time to relax. I decided it was time to move my belongings from my brother's place to Alexander's villa. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw when I walked into the living room. My brother and Charles Clark, yes, that Charles Clark, were locked in a passionate kiss on the couch, oblivious to the world around them. The sight nearly made me faint. Charles Clark, I'm going to kill you. How dare you make a move on my brother? My brother turned bright red, mumbling, I like Charles, bro. Shut up. I barked. Charles, however, was entirely unfazed. Smirking, he pointed at me and Alexander. And what about you two? You're sharing a bed with my cousin, but I can't date your brother? That was it. The gloves were off. Charles and I launched at each other, fists flying as we brawled like we were kids again. Meanwhile, Alexander and my brother sat on the couch, calmly eating sunflower seeds and watching the chaos unfold. Who was I supposed to complain to? Extra Alexander Daneman's perspective. I've always known I wasn't my adoptive parents' biological child. Somewhere in my memory, there was a vague sense that I had other parents, a different life. But I was too young to remember where I'd come from or who they were. The kids in the village used to taunt me, calling me a bot bastard. I'd fight them, only to be scolded harshly by my foster father instead of defended. At first, my foster parents were kind enough. But over time, my foster father fell into gambling and drinking. When drunk, he'd turn violent, beating both my foster mother and me. One night, in the middle of a thunderstorm, he came home after losing everything at the gambling table. In a fit of madness, he grabbed me, shouting about using me as collateral for his debts. My foster mother tried to stop him, throwing herself between us. Enraged, he grabbed a wooden stool and swung it at her. The storm was deafening. Each sickening crack of the stool against her skull was swallowed by the thunder. Blood soaked my pajamas as I tried desperately to pull him away. But I was too small, too weak. He kicked me so hard he broke 2 of my ribs. That night, my foster mother died. Afterward, my foster father disappeared, leaving me alone to face the whispers and glares of the villagers. They called me a murderer's son and blamed me for my foster mother's death. I was just 14. Relatives came to claim the house, eager to sell it off, and they pushed to send me to an orphanage. I refused to leave. I had nowhere else to go, but I wasn't going to let them take what little was left of my life. Then, out of nowhere, the village committee came to my door. They told me my biological parents had found me. They were coming to take me home. For the first time in years, I felt hope. I waited eagerly for their arrival. But days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. 3 months later, there was still no word. My relatives mocked me, saying I was delusional and that I'd be lucky if the orphanage would still take me in. Then one day, my uncle and cousin arrived. They told me my parents had died in a car accident on their way to get me. The news shattered me. My hope turned to despair, and I truly began to believe I was cursed. Maybe I really was destined to bring misfortune to everyone I loved. I ran away from my uncle's house, not wanting to drag them down with me. One night, I found myself trying to sleep under a bridge, only to be attacked by a group of homeless men who claimed I was trespassing on their territory. I laughed bitterly. Territory? What kind of territory did beggars have? I fought back, despite being weak and half-starved. They beat me until I was on the verge of death. Just when I was about to give up, a basketball came flying through the air, hitting one of my attackers square in the head. A boy in a sports uniform appeared, his confident grin lighting up the darkness. Through swollen eyes, I caught a glimpse of him. His face was bold and full of life, and there was a striking red mole on his left thumb. When I woke up in the hospital, my uncle was sitting by my bedside, crying, while my cousin berated himself for not keeping a closer eye on me. I looked around, hoping to see the boy who had saved me, but he was nowhere to be found. I never even learned his name. After my parents' deaths, my grandfather made it clear he had no intention of bringing me back into the Daneman family. If not for my uncle, I would have been left to rot in that village forever. I couldn't stay with my uncle, though. My parents had left their shares in Elite Group to me in their will, and I wasn't going to let them go to waste. I returned to the Damon household, determined to fight for my place. I kept my head down and worked tirelessly to build my own power. When Ziv Daneman's sexual harassment scandal broke, I seized the opportunity. I used public pressure and hard evidence to force him out, leaving my grandfather no choice but to appoint me as CEO. On my first day at Elite Group, I saw him again. The face I had never forgotten. The boy who had saved me. But something was off. He didn't have the same fire, the same vitality. Still, people changed. So had I. Even though he didn't meet all the qualifications, I hired him. I wanted to know if he remembered that night, but every time I approached him, he seemed oblivious. Then, one day, the elevator malfunctioned while it was just the 2 of us inside. He was terrified, shaking like a leaf. I tried to comfort him, holding his hand, only to realize something crucial. His left thumb didn't have the red mole. I'd made a mistake. This wasn't the same person. But that realization only reignited my curiosity. I had HR pull his records and discovered he had a brother. Could it be? When I finally met Edmund Richardson, it all clicked. The bold gaze, the unrestrained confidence, it was him. The person I'd been searching for all these years. I didn't know why Benjamin had lied to me, but it didn't matter. I'd found Edmund. That was all that mattered. Then Ziv drugged me, and Edmund revealed his identity. I should have been furious, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I was too afraid he'd disappear again if I pushed too hard. So, I pretended to stay mad just to keep him close. Now that I have him, I'm never letting him go. The end.
Thanks for stopping by. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any new videos.